Can anyone actually own the land? Welcome to Philosopher's Corner. I'm John. Can anyone actually own the land? So obviously we live in a world that's primarily based on land ownership. At least the modern economic world, wherever you find it. Doesn't matter if it's the east, the west, the north, the south, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what political system you're in. The whole economic system at its fundamental and most basic areas is based on land ownership, or at least the idea of land ownership. And it doesn't matter if it's the government owning all the land, or companies and corporations owning the land, or individuals owning the land. Land ownership has been the fundamental form of wealth and status in modern human societies since the first time that we started setting up villages and cordoning off sections of land and creating societal and political entities on top of those systems of ownership of land. Essentially, all of the economies of the world are derivatives of land ownership. Even at this modern stage with really high financing and derivative markets and all these things, if you back engineer all of the forms of the economy of the wealth, it comes back to land ownership. At the governmental level, it's about their ability to use it for myriad amounts of resources, be they natural, be they human, be they political, whatever. And for the individual, who is conveniently stripped of most of those rights by whatever their local government is, they at least have the stability and security of projecting to other individuals and citizens in their society that they have a long-term place to live out of which they can basically set up headquarters. And then other institutions within their societies, especially economic ones, recognize the long-term implications of them being on that land and give them credit as such. And it is its own currency, and it creates its own world from which wealth is derived. And the wealth can take many, many forms. In fact, early American history, and this happened all over the place, only landowners were recognized as full citizens with the ability to vote and engage in the government and engage in the business and the affairs of the people. And anyone else who didn't own land was in a lower class of citizenry, starting with the lack of ability to even vote. That's what a cornerstone of this modern reality, the idea of land ownership, is. So can anyone actually own the land? What does it even mean to own the land? The idea is that you have full dominion, that you've taken possession of the land. The idea that it is in the popular mindset about this is that it is yours. It has the land that has become your possession. It is now an instrument of the owner to do with what they shall please, philosophically. Now, based on the country or the region or whatever political and legal systems are heaped on top of that idea, there are restrictions and all sorts of things. Zoning, and like I said earlier, most countries, if an individual owns land, they don't have any real rights or dominions over the land. They can't have mineral rights, they can't dig, they can't go under a certain amount, they can only do certain things with it. They don't actually have full dominion over the land. You know, same for a lot of corporations and companies. They have highly legislated use of that land, and as opposed to the government, where the government, they can do whatever they want with it. They're allowed to keep things secret. They're allowed to keep things out of view of the public. They're allowed to do, I mean, the U.S. government spent a bunch of the 40s and 50s just using land that they claim to own to test nuclear bombs. That's pretty much the height of doing with whatever you want with land. We're not the only ones. The Soviets did it. A bunch of other countries have done it. But that's pretty much the most ridiculous thing you can do with land, is use it to blow up nuclear bombs. So underneath it all, can you actually own it? Native Americans say you can't. And most Aboriginals will say that you can't. You can occupy land. You can cultivate a relationship with the land. You can get in harmony with the land. You can live there for generations and create a nearly unbreakable bond with the land, which is also evidence that the earth itself is a conscious being, because it does seem to react in a unique manner with individuals and animals who treat it in a particular way. And that relationship is malleable. It can change, right? So the Native Americans, for example, they were more nomadic. They would just pick up and flow around based on what the land was telling them to do, basically. And they learned how to read the signs of what the land was telling them to do. It's referred to as sort of, mystical ability, sign reading and omens and auspices and things like that. And their culture really reflected just a very natural way to interact with the land, respecting the land as a part of Earth as a conscious being. And they knew that you can't own it, because to own it implies that you're the master of it, that it is somehow indentured or enslaved to you, or is now your possession, or to something for you to look at, to use as an empty resource and not as an active partner. Especially with the way the feelings about that idea of ownership have evolved, where so much of modern humanity determines that land ownership is about plundering the land for resources to convert into monetary currency, as opposed to a natural form of living that doesn't have these economic buffers and visions going over the human beings living on it, where they now are able to see it as a living consciousness that they're interacting with, that has give and take, and there's communication occurring. So back to the idea of this ownership. So the idea of the ownership of the land is that you have a claim to it, that for some reason you think that you have dominion over it due to nothing more than what amounts to intellectual understandings with other human beings who really don't have any more authority to own the land than anybody else, but they've agreed with you that they're going to let you own it based on relative to some system that's essentially built on this idea that the land can be owned in an economic sense and then subjugated, right? So it's already sort of an irrational premise, like an illogical premise. Because how deep down does the ownership go? Or like you just own I own an acre, so I own 2 miles down underneath the core of this acre of land that I own. Where does it end and where does it begin? And like I said, in a lot of these political systems, even though the land or ownership is one of the most fundamental units, if not the most fundamental unit of wealth within the country, oftentimes when you look at what they confer different versions of ownership to its individual citizens versus the government itself, in terms of its use, the way you can treat it, what you can do with it, all this stuff. So even within this highly doubtable version of what they call land ownership, they still even pare down all of those rights and abilities to their citizenry to the point where it's nearly meaningless, to the point where if you look at it, most of the time, really what they've done is they've created a situation in which a person can purchase the structure on a bit of land, and then they never actually own the land underneath it, and they have to pay taxes in perpetuity, just like sharecroppers in the feudal system. And none of them can ever really own it. They can never really have true dominion over it. And most of the time, if they do, or if they do find something that's extraordinarily valuable, then their local governments or companies will come in and find a way to take it from them. And the subtext to those hostile takeovers, really just thefts, is, well, you don't understand, but within this system, you don't have the same rights as us because we're bigger landowners and we're friends with the even bigger landowners, and we're in a class level where we have a different set of rights regarding the basic definition of what it means to be a landowner and the derivative powers and benefits that come from that. And you're not privy to those, and you're actually not even really allowed to talk about them that all much. So even based on this already kind of ridiculous idea that you can own the land, within it, the gradations of how they dispense this sort of basically fraudulent idea that you can own the land, let alone have any like birthrights or territorial claims to it or all this crazy stuff that humans get caught up in. They're not even giving the people within their own sort of landowning Ponzi scheme the same rights, and they're not even giving them the rights that they think they have when they get into the deal. They go, oh, well, you're doing this, but you don't really have all the rights, but we're not going to tell you that. So from top to bottom, in terms of the idea of land ownership in modern society, it's not great. It's pretty much fraudulent. It's highly dubious whether you can own land. You can build a fence around land and keep it to yourself and treat it as a possession. But philosophically, it doesn't mean you own it. It just means you're occupying it. And occupying land is different than owning land. Owning land doesn't seem to be a thing that is possible to do. I've never seen any information from an Aboriginal tribe anywhere on Earth throughout history where you talk to them and they say, oh yeah, we've determined that you can own the land. Mother Nature says, yes, this is now yours. This is in your possession. You can do with what you want. I mean, because as a human being, I mean, you talk about the land, most people are just thinking like the top 10 inches of topsoil anyway, and like, 10 feet in the air and whatever the boundaries are. But that's not even the land. Like, even if you want to get into a definition, even if you gave authority to the idea that you could own the land, then you have to get into the idea of, well, what is the land? How deep does it go? How high does it go? How, whatever. What are all the constituent parts of the land? And how do you own it? How do you own the land? Do you own the air that's drifting through? It would seem to be that the entire concept is simply an economic concept meant to, in a way, to subjugate and turn Mother Nature just into a resource. And in doing so, make all the citizens see the land purely from an economic standpoint, which is really antithetical to what the actual planet's purpose is. If we zoom out and we say, well, all land is just planet Earth, which it is, and we say, well, what's the real purpose of planet Earth? And that's a full video, but if we determine that the purpose of planet Earth is to support life in all its various forms and to maintain some sort of homeostasis and evolutionary petri dish for all the different forms of life, which is an innumerable amount of lives on Earth. It's crazy. Well, that should be the primary concept that's honored in regards to how we view it, even through an economic system. But the economic system does not do that at all. The economic system, and it's universal essentially with all the humans, is to look at it, try to figure out how to own it, and then try to somehow turn it into economic utility without looking into any of the deeper aspects of it, the consciousness aspects, what the actual utility is for the planet, any of these things. And what's even more annoying is that we'll see people who come into the conversation who claim to be activists for the earth or animals or whatever, and they're really just giving new arguments of how to keep it within the economic perspective. And a lot of them don't even know they're doing that. They're just like, well, treat it better and this and this and this, and they're just like, well, let's just kick the can down the road and just make it like a better version of the economic view we have on it, instead of scrapping the whole fraudulent view on it in the first place, which of course is an ideal view, and there's no way that has any, political reality. It would never occur that the earth is just like, oh yeah, we're all wrong, Mother Earth is amazing, it's just our living consciousness sentient planet that we're on that loves us, so yeah, we're not gonna have land ownership. No, it's a free-for-all. Like that, obviously that's never gonna happen, but philosophically it should. And if you can't get to the ideal, you at least get to a point where, okay, fine, if you're gonna have to view everything as, if every aspect of life is going to be dictated by an economic perspective in this world, the first step they should do is go, okay, we can't really own the land. And then two, even if you're going to own the land, you got to make the rights of land ownership at least consistent within the tiers of the society, which they obviously aren't. And then there needs to be a deeper understanding of what it is. Now, many, many people know and have a deeper relationship with the earth. They know what's going on. Lots of people do. This is not no new news here. But it needs to be incorporated in a way that isn't coercive, and it doesn't feed more power to the powers that be that are already the ones that are responsible for the degradation of the earth, and they're trying to put it off on these other individuals or entities who really have nothing to do with it, just so that because they know the game and because they have a wider perspective on it and market position and the power to push people around and basically brainwash people. We need like a real pure fundamental understanding of what the earth is to come forth in people naturally, and then they can start acting in accordance with what the land actually is. Like I said, a lot of people do it, but it would be ideal if it expanded more. And I mean, most wars are just wars for land, really. You talk about resources. So these fundamental understandings of what the land actually is and what it does, they're important. The land is more than just an economic thing, and no one can really own it. Even within the systems that say you can own it, a lot of the times when you think you own it, you're still not, because they're playing some weird shell game with you. And that's weird. And the land certainly doesn't think you can own it. So there's that. Nobody asked the land. So, yeah, land. Can we own it? Philosophically, I don't think so. I think we just live on it. I think all the ideas of the ownership of it are made up. I think most of them are pretty irrational. I'm not saying they're not useful. I'm not saying they haven't propelled civilizations and societies, and I'm not saying that anybody's going to tear it all down. But philosophically, yeah, I don't think you can own it. I think most people know it, and I think all we can do is live on it. And sometimes we have agreements with people to live or have control over certain areas of land for certain longer periods of time than other people. But I think it's healthy, even if you are a landowner, that you just know, okay, this is my relationship with the land, and you should know that you can't truly own it. And once again, I do think a lot of people who are in that position do know that. But I think it bears repeating, because if you understand that we're on Earth and it's a sentient being, and you're not trying to save the whole Earth, because nobody can do that. And to be real, all these nuclear bombs got detonated for tests in the 40s and 50s. If those didn't put the Earth into, if that didn't tilt the axis of the Earth and screw everything up or destroy the atmosphere, like you driving a economy car to work or whatever, is not going to do anything. I mean, they're literally just popping off nuclear bombs everywhere, dirty bombs too, and didn't do anything. So Earth is fine in that regard. But the question of our relationship to it and how each of us approaches it is malleable and it can be changed. So even if you do own your land, it's just good to know that, like, okay, on paper you own it, but like really, you don't. You're tending it, you're living on it. You may even pass it down to your kids, grandkids, whatever, but you're just living on it. And I think it's a much healthier relationship to have with it than to think that somehow you actually own it, like it's your slave, because that's not true. And I think we all get more out of relationships in general when we try not to take possession of the object or person that we're having a relationship with. So, well, that's enough on can we own land. Thanks for spending some time here at Philosopher's Corner. Make your own videos. Think for yourself. Think for yourself. That's the key here. And have fun.